The workers laughed when they saw the dusty man carrying a sack on his shoulder. But before the day was over, every one of them would discover they had made a mistake they would never forget. The sun had just begun to rise over Green Valley Agricultural Supplies, one of the largest farming supply companies in the region. Employees moved quickly through the compound. Forklifts transported pallets of fertilizer. Trucks lined up outside the warehouses. Workers shouted instructions as another busy day began. Among the crowd walked a man nobody paid attention to. His shirt was faded. His boots were covered in dust. His hat looked old enough to belong in a museum. A heavy sack rested on his shoulder as he crossed the yard. To everyone around him, he looked like an ordinary farm laborer. Someone who had spent years working under the hot sun. Someone who probably struggled to make ends meet. Someone unimportant. A few workers glanced at him and looked away. Others barely noticed him. But a group standing near the loading dock began whispering. "Looks like another day laborer. By, must be looking for work. Poor guy looks exhausted." One of them laughed. Maybe he got lost on his way to the fields. The others joined in. The man heard every word. Yet he kept walking. His expression never changed. His pace never slowed. He simply observed, watching, listening, paying attention. There was something unusual about him. Not in the way he dressed, not in the way he walked, but in the way he looked at people. His eyes carried the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. The confidence of someone who already knew exactly who he was. The workers couldn't see it. The supervisors couldn't see it. Nobody could. Because people rarely look beyond appearances. And that morning, appearances were about to fool everyone. The man's name was Jacob, and before sunset, his name would become the only thing anyone in the company could talk about. One careless insult spoken in front of a warehouse would set off a chain of events that nobody could stop. Jacob approached the reception building. Inside, employees moved between desks answering calls and processing orders. He waited patiently. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. No one acknowledged him. Several employees walked past. None asked whether he needed assistance. Finally, a young receptionist glanced up. "Can I help you?" Jacob smiled. "I'm here for a meeting." The receptionist looked confused. "A meeting?" She examined his clothing, then looked at the dirty boots, then at the worn hat. "Who are you meeting?" "I'll explain when the time comes." The answer only increased her confusion. Before she could ask another question, a warehouse supervisor entered the lobby. His name was Martin. Martin was known for being impatient, especially with people he believed were beneath him. The moment he saw Jacob, he assumed he knew exactly who he was. Another laborer, another temporary worker, another person at the bottom of the ladder. Martin pointed toward a stack of boxes. "You there?" Jacob turned. Martin spoke again. "Those supplies aren't going to move themselves." Several employees laughed. Jacob remained silent. Martin frowned. "Did you hear me?" "I did." "Then what are you waiting for?" The room watched. Most expected Jacob to argue. Most expected him to defend himself. Instead, Jacob calmly walked over to the boxes. Then he began helping. The employees laughed even harder. "Guess we were right. Definitely a laborer. At least he's hardworking." Martin smirked, satisfied with himself. But Jacob wasn't helping because he was afraid. And he wasn't helping because he had to. He was helping because he wanted to learn something. Something far more valuable than business presentations or sales reports. He wanted to learn how people treated others when they believed nobody important was watching. And what he saw that morning told him more than any meeting ever could. What nobody knew was that the man carrying boxes owned more farmland than some entire districts. Years earlier, Jacob's life looked completely different. At 20 years old, he owned almost nothing. His father had passed away unexpectedly. The family farm consisted of only a few acres. The equipment was outdated. The debts were overwhelming. Many people advised him to sell everything. "Farming is finished. You'll never succeed. Find another career." Jacob listened, then ignored them. Every morning before sunrise, he worked the fields. Every evening after sunset, he studied agriculture. When others spent money, he saved. When others relaxed, he learned. The first years were brutal. Droughts destroyed crops, floods damaged fields, market prices collapsed. More than once, he came dangerously close to bankruptcy. There were days he questioned everything. Days when quitting seemed easier. Days when failure felt inevitable. Yet every setback taught him something. Every loss became a lesson. Slowly, things began to change. One field became 5, 5 became 20, 20 became 100. Then came opportunities. Landowners retiring from farming, properties available below market value, investments others were too afraid to make. Jacob saw potential where others saw risk, and he acted. Year after year, his operation expanded. His reputation grew, his yields increased, his business flourished. But one thing never changed: his humility. He refused to chase luxury, refused to show off, refused to measure his worth through appearances. While others bought expensive cars, Jacob invested in land. While others purchased mansions, Jacob purchased farmland. By the time he reached middle age, he owned over 5,000 acres. 5,000 acres, an agricultural empire stretching farther than the eye could see. Yet he still dressed like the farmer he had always been. Because he never forgot where he came from, and because he understood a truth most people never learn. The richest person in the room is often the one who feels no need to prove it. Jacob wasn't visiting the company to buy supplies. He was there to make a decision worth millions. Back in the present, the company continued operating as normal. Employees worked, managers gave instructions, executives prepared presentations. None of them realized what was happening. Several agricultural supply companies had been competing for a massive contract. The contract involved supplying fertilizer, seed, equipment, and support services for thousands of acres of farmland. Winning it would generate enormous profits. Losing it cost money. For months, executives had prepared proposals. They researched, they negotiated, they strategized. Everyone wanted the business, but only one company would win. And the final decision belonged to Jacob. He had intentionally arrived early, very early, before meetings, before presentations, before introductions. He wanted to see something, not their products, not their prices, not their promises, their character. Because Jacob believed character revealed itself when nobody knew they were being evaluated. And so far, the results weren't impressive. As he continued observing the facility, he noticed patterns. Some employees ignored people they considered unimportant. Others spoke respectfully regardless of status. Some leaders inspired trust. Others ruled through arrogance. Jacob noticed everything, every conversation, every interaction, every decision. The company thought they were preparing to impress a wealthy agricultural entrepreneur. In reality, they were already being tested, and most didn't even know the exam had begun. The jokes became louder during lunch, but one employee noticed something that didn't make sense. By noon, Jacob had become the unofficial target of workplace humor. Workers gathered around tables in the lunchroom. Stories circulated. Speculation spread. Nobody knew who he was, but everyone seemed confident they knew what he was. A laborer, a farmhand, a temporary worker. The assumptions continued. Jacob sat alone at a corner table, unbothered, quietly eating his lunch. Across the room sat a young employee named Sarah. Unlike most people in the building, Sarah paid attention. Not to appearances, to details. And something about Jacob didn't fit the story everyone else believed. While the others laughed, she noticed him reviewing documents. Not ordinary documents, production reports, yield forecasts, market analyses. The kinds of reports executives studied, not laborers, not temporary workers, not warehouse staff. Sarah became curious. A few moments later, she watched Jacob pull out a notebook. Inside were detailed notes about farming operations, crop rotations, equipment efficiency, land management strategies. The information was sophisticated, far beyond what most people would understand. Sarah frowned. Who exactly was this man? The mystery deepened when Jacob received a phone call. His voice remained calm, professional, confident. "I'll review the acquisition proposal later," he said. "Make sure the legal team checks every detail." Sarah nearly dropped her drink. Acquisition proposal? Legal team? That didn't sound like a laborer, not even close. Across the room, everyone else continued laughing, completely unaware that the man they mocked was hiding a secret so large it would soon shake the entire company. And before the day ended, the truth would finally come out. He was treated like a laborer until they learned he owned 5,000 acres of farmland. While everyone else was busy judging Jacob, one employee made a simple choice that would completely change the course of her future. As lunch continued, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious man sitting alone. Nothing about him matched the image everyone had created. The more she observed him, the more questions she had. Most people would have ignored those questions. Sarah didn't. She picked up a bottle of water and walked toward Jacob's table. Several co-workers noticed. "Why are you talking to him?" one whispered. Another laughed. "Maybe she feels sorry for him." Sarah ignored them. She approached Jacob and smiled. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like some water?" Jacob looked up. For a brief moment, surprise crossed his face. Not because of the water. Because throughout the entire morning, she was the first person who had treated him like a human being. "Thank you," he said warmly. She placed the bottle on the table. "Do you work here?" she asked. Jacob smiled slightly. "Not exactly." That answer only deepened the mystery. Sarah laughed. "Everyone seems convinced they know who you are. And who do they think I am? A laborer." Jacob chuckled. "Interesting." The conversation continued. Sarah expected him to complain about the way people treated him. He never did. She expected him to criticize the company. He never did. Instead, he asked questions. Questions about the employees. Questions about the culture. Questions about leadership. The discussion felt unusual, almost as though he were gathering information. Before leaving, Sarah said something simple. "My father was a farmer." Jacob's eyes lit up. "Was?" "He passed away a few years ago." Jacob nodded respectfully. "I understand." Something in his voice told her he genuinely did. Then he added, "Farming teaches lessons most people never learn." Sarah smiled. "It certainly does." As she returned to her seat, she had no idea that this short conversation would soon become the most important interaction of her career. And Jacob quietly made a mental note of her name, Sarah. The only person who showed kindness when there was nothing to gain from it. At exactly 2 o'clock, the entire atmosphere of the company changed when news spread that a very important guest had arrived. Executives rushed through hallways. Managers adjusted their ties. Conference rooms were checked repeatedly. Presentations were reviewed one final time. Something important was about to happen. The company had spent months preparing for this meeting. Millions of dollars were at stake. Employees whispered excitedly. "Have you heard? The client is finally coming. I heard he owns thousands of acres. They say he's one of the biggest agricultural investors in the region." The rumors spread quickly. Nobody knew exactly what he looked like, only that he was wealthy, very wealthy. Martin, the supervisor who had spent the morning ordering Jacob around, became especially excited. This contract could elevate his career. If everything went well, senior management would notice, perhaps even reward him. He imagined shaking hands with the client, making a good impression, building a valuable relationship. What he didn't know was that he had already met the client several times, and every interaction had gone terribly. Meanwhile, Jacob sat quietly in a waiting area, watching, listening, observing. A senior executive approached him. Unlike everyone else, the executive immediately recognized him. "Mr. Jacob, we're ready whenever you are." Jacob stood. "Thank you." The executive led him toward the conference room. Neither noticed Sarah watching from a distance. She froze. "Mr. Jacob, why would a senior executive address him that way?" Something significant was happening, and she was about to discover exactly who the mysterious stranger really was. The conference room fell completely silent when the dusty laborer stood up and introduced himself. Inside the room, department heads and senior executives sat around a polished table. Everyone appeared nervous. The contract meant too much. Then the doors opened. The executive entered first. Behind him walked Jacob. Several managers looked confused. Some assumed he had entered by mistake. Others thought he was helping carry materials. Martin nearly laughed. Then something unexpected happened. The executive pulled out the chair at the head of the table. For Jacob, the room instantly became quiet. Confused glances filled the room. Jacob calmly sat down. The executive smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us." A pause followed. Then he continued. "I'd like to introduce the owner of Horizon Agricultural Holdings." Several people leaned forward. The name was familiar, very familiar. Horizon Agricultural Holdings controlled thousands of acres of highly productive farmland. Its annual revenues were enormous. Agricultural magazines frequently featured its success. Everyone knew the company. Nobody expected this. The executive turned toward Jacob. "Mr. Jacob Williams, silence. Complete silence. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody breathed. Martin's face lost all color. One manager nearly dropped his pen. Another stared in disbelief. Jacob slowly stood. "Thank you for having me." The voice was the same. The man was the same. The dusty laborer was the owner, the billionaire farmer, the client, the decision-maker, the man they had spent the entire day disrespecting. Shock spread across the room like wildfire. Every insult returned to their memories, every joke, every laugh, every moment of arrogance. Suddenly, they looked very different, and the realization was devastating. As the shock settled, everyone wanted the answer to one question. Why didn't he tell anyone who he was? The meeting room remained painfully quiet. Finally, one executive cleared his throat. "Mr. Williams, if I may ask," Jacob nodded. "Of course. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" The question hung in the air. Everyone wanted the answer. Jacob folded his hands, then spoke calmly. "Because I wasn't interested in how people treated me when they knew who I was." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. "I was interested in how they treated me when they thought I was nobody." The words hit hard, very hard. Several employees lowered their eyes. Jacob continued, "Anyone can show respect to someone wealthy. Anyone can be polite to a powerful person. Anyone can smile when they expect something in return." He paused. "But true character appears when there's nothing to gain." The room became even quieter, because everyone knew he was right. Jacob wasn't angry. His voice remained calm, professional, measured. That somehow made it worse. If he had shouted, perhaps they could defend themselves. If he had argued, perhaps they could argue back. But he simply stated the truth. And the truth was impossible to challenge. He looked around the room. "I learned a great deal today." Nobody doubted that. The company thought they had been evaluating a client. In reality, the client had been evaluating them. All day long, the future of the company now depended on the judgment of the man they had treated like a laborer. Presentations began. Slides appeared on screens. Managers explained pricing structures. Executives highlighted logistics networks. Analysts presented growth projections. Everything looked impressive, very impressive. Yet the atmosphere remained tense. Everyone knew the real issue wasn't pricing, or transportation, or inventory. The real issue was trust. Could they still win the contract? Did they even deserve it? Jacob listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions, reviewing data. Hours passed. Eventually, the presentations ended. The room waited. No one dared speak. No one dared interrupt. Finally, Jacob stood. The decision everyone had been waiting for was about to be made. Millions of dollars hung in the balance. Careers hung in the balance. Reputations hung in the balance. Jacob slowly looked around the room. His expression revealed nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no clues. Then he began to speak. And what he said next would change several lives forever. He was treated like a laborer until they learned he owned 5 acres of farmland. Everyone expected Jacob to talk about profits, contracts, and business. Instead, he began talking about something that made the entire room uncomfortable. The conference room remained silent. Jacob stood at the head of the table, looking at the people before him. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then he finally broke the silence. "Your presentation was impressive." A wave of relief swept across the room. Several executives exchanged hopeful glances. Perhaps they still had a chance. Jacob continued. "Your logistics are excellent. More relief. Your pricing is competitive." A few smiles appeared. Then Jacob paused, and everything changed. "But that's not what concerned me today." The smiles disappeared. The room tensed again. Jacob slowly walked around the conference table. "I've spent decades building my farming business." His voice remained calm. "In all those years, I've learned something important." He stopped. "A company is not defined by its advertisements." No one moved. "It is not defined by its presentations." The room remained still. "And it is certainly not defined by what people say when they know they're being watched." Several employees lowered their eyes. Jacob continued. "A company is defined by what happens when nobody thinks it matters." His words struck like thunder, because everyone knew exactly what he meant. "I arrived here before sunrise." A few executives looked surprised. "Nobody recognized me." He nodded. "That gave me a valuable opportunity." The room grew quieter. I saw kindness. His eyes moved toward Sarah. I saw professionalism. Again, he glanced at her, and unfortunately, I also saw arrogance. Martin felt his stomach tighten. Jacob wasn't attacking anyone. He wasn't raising his voice. Yet every sentence felt heavier than the last. I watched people ignore others they considered unimportant. Silence. I watched people make assumptions. More silence. I watched people confuse appearance with value. The room could barely breathe. Jacob looked around one final time. The question before me is simple. Everyone leaned forward. If this is how people are treated when they appear powerless, how would my employees be treated after signing a contract? No one had an answer, because the answer was obvious, and it wasn't flattering. Then Jacob did something nobody in the room saw coming. He smiled. The tension eased slightly. Then he looked directly at Sarah. "Would you please stand?" Sarah froze. Her eyes widened. The entire room turned toward her. Slowly she stood, confused, nervous, unsure of what was happening. Jacob nodded respectfully. "This young woman spoke to me today." Sarah swallowed hard. The room listened carefully. "She offered me water." Several people shifted uncomfortably. "She treated me with respect." Jacob paused. "Not because she knew who I was." Silence. "Not because she expected anything in return." Another pause. "But because she believed every person deserves dignity." The room became completely still. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. She had done nothing extraordinary, or so she thought. Jacob continued. "In business, technical skills are important." He looked around. "Experience matters." He nodded. "Knowledge matters." Another pause, "But character matters most." Several executives lowered their heads. Then Jacob made an announcement, one that shocked everyone. "Sarah, I would like to offer you a position." She blinked. "A position?" Jacob smiled. "At Horizon Agricultural Holdings." The room erupted into whispers. Sarah stood frozen. Jacob continued. "I need leaders." The room listened. "I need people I can trust." He nodded toward her. "And today you demonstrated qualities that cannot be taught in a classroom." Sarah could barely speak. Tears filled her eyes. For years she had worked quietly, unnoticed, undervalued. Now everything was changing, because one act of kindness had been noticed by the right person. While one person's kindness created opportunity, others were about to discover that actions have consequences. The meeting ended, but the conversations had only begun. Executives gathered privately. Managers spoke in hushed tones. Employees replayed every moment from the day. Meanwhile, Martin sat alone. The confidence he had displayed earlier was gone. He remembered every order he had given Jacob, every assumption, every disrespectful comment, every opportunity to act differently. Regret settled heavily upon him. Later that afternoon, senior management met with him. The discussion was difficult, very difficult. The issue wasn't a single mistake. The issue was a pattern. Jacob's visit had exposed problems that already existed, problems leadership could no longer ignore. Respect, professionalism, culture. The company realized something important. The way people treated Jacob wasn't just about Jacob. It reflected deeper issues within the organization. Changes became necessary. Training programs were introduced. Leadership expectations were raised. New standards were established. Some employees embraced the lessons. Others resisted. But one thing became clear. The company would never view workplace respect the same way again, because a single day had revealed truths that years of reports never could. A week later, several employees visited Jacob's farm, and what they saw left them speechless. The invitation arrived unexpectedly. Selected employees were invited to tour Horizon Agricultural Holdings. Many accepted immediately, including Sarah. Early on a bright morning, buses arrived at the property. As they approached the entrance, conversations slowly faded. People stared through the windows. Fields stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Acres upon acres of thriving crops, modern irrigation systems, massive machinery, state-of-the-art facilities. The scale was breathtaking. One employee whispered, "This can't all belong to him." But it did, and they had only seen a fraction of it. The tour continued. Warehouses larger than football fields. Processing centers operating with incredible efficiency. Research departments developing new farming techniques. Teams of experts managing different regions. Everywhere they looked, there was evidence of vision, discipline, and long-term planning. The operation resembled a small city, not a farm, a city. Employees finally understood the true magnitude of Jacob's success. 5,000 acres wasn't merely a number. It represented decades of sacrifice, Decades of learning, decades of persistence. As Sarah looked across the endless fields, she remembered the dusty man sitting alone in the lunchroom. The contrast felt almost unbelievable, yet Jacob himself remained unchanged. He still wore simple clothing, still greeted workers by name, still treated everyone with respect. The greater his success became, the more humble he seemed. And that impressed people even more than the size of his empires. Scene 15. The real wealth hook. The most valuable thing Jacob owned wasn't 5,000 acres of farmland. It was something money could never buy. As the tour ended, employees gathered beneath a large shade tree. Jacob stood before them. The afternoon breeze moved gently across the fields. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Jacob shared one final lesson. When people hear my story, they usually focus on the land. The group listened carefully. They focus on the acres. He smiled. The equipment. Another smile. The business. He looked across the horizon. But those things are not my greatest achievement. The employees watched silently. My greatest achievement is remaining the same person I was before the success. The words carried weight. Money changes many people. He nodded. Sometimes for the better. A pause. Sometimes for the worse. The field stretched endlessly behind him. But character should never depend on circumstances. Everyone listened. If you respect people only when they're rich, your respect has no value. Silence. If you are kind only when someone can help you, your kindness has no value. More silence. The true test of character is how you treat those who appear to have nothing to offer. The lesson settled deeply into every listener's mind, because everyone remembered how the story began. With assumptions, with judgment, with appearances, and they now understood how wrong those assumptions had been. Jacob smiled one final time. The world is full of people carrying hidden stories. He looked around the group. Never underestimate anyone. The afternoon sun dipped lower, the fields glowed golden, and in that moment, everyone understood. The greatest thing Jacob had built wasn't a farming empire, it was a reputation for humility, integrity, respect, and wisdom. Closing narration. The man they treated like a laborer owned 5,000 acres of farmland. But the real surprise wasn't his wealth. The real surprise was his character. Because while others judged appearances, he valued people. While others measured worth through status, he measured it through actions. And while others chased recognition, he quietly built an empire. His story became a reminder that success often wears simple clothes, that wisdom rarely announces itself, and that every person deserves respect, whether they own 5,000 acres or none at all. Because you never truly know who someone is, but you always reveal who you are by the way you treat them. 3 days after Jacob's visit, something happened that nobody inside the company expected. The entire region started talking about him. What began as a simple workplace story quickly spread. One employee told a friend. The friend told another person's. Soon, local farmers were discussing the mysterious businessman who had disguised himself as an ordinary laborer. Agricultural groups shared the story online. Business pages reposted it. Farmers from neighboring states began asking questions. Was it true? Did a man really own 5,000 acres and still dress like a field worker? The answer was yes. But what fascinated people wasn't the size of Jacob's farm. It was his attitude. People admired the fact that he hadn't arrived with bodyguards. He hadn't demanded special treatment. He hadn't announced his wealth. Instead, he had quietly observed how people treated someone they believed had no influence. The story struck a nerve, because everyone had witnessed similar situations. Most people had seen someone ignored because of their appearance. Most people had seen wealth respected while humility was overlooked. And now Jacob's story had become a symbol of something bigger. A lesson, a reminder, a warning. Never judge a book by its cover. Meanwhile, Jacob continued his work as if nothing had happened. While others discussed him, he was inspecting irrigation systems. While social media praised him, he was reviewing crop reports. While journalists requested interviews, he was meeting farm managers. Success had never distracted him before, and it wasn't about to start now. Sarah thought receiving a job offer was the biggest surprise of her life. She was wrong. A few weeks later, she arrived at Horizon Agricultural Holdings. The opportunity still felt unreal. As she entered the headquarters, she expected luxury. She expected executives hiding behind large offices. She expected an intimidating corporate environment. Instead, she found something entirely different. People smiled. Employees greeted one another respectfully. Managers listened to workers. Ideas flowed freely. The culture felt different, healthier, stronger, more human. Later that morning, Sarah met Jacob again. He greeted her the same way he had greeted everyone else. No grand entrance, no display of authority, just genuine kindness. During her orientation, she learned something remarkable. Many of the company's senior leaders had started in entry-level positions. Warehouse workers had become managers. Field assistants had become directors. Farm laborers had become supervisors. Jacob believed talent could come from anywhere. All people needed was opportunity, and he built his company around that belief. For the first time, Sarah understood why Horizon Agricultural Holdings continued growing while many competitors struggled. It wasn't merely because of good farming. It was because of good leadership. The employees expected Jacob to live in a mansion. What they discovered shocked them even more than his 5,000 acres. One afternoon, Sarah visited a section of the property near Jacob's residence. She expected a palace. After all, many people with far less wealth lived extravagantly. Instead, she found a comfortable but modest home, large enough for a family, simple enough to blend into the countryside. No golden gates, no luxury cars lined up outside, no unnecessary displays of wealth. When Sarah eventually asked him why, Jacob smiled. "I've already bought everything I wanted." She looked confused. "Everything?" Jacob nodded. "The land, the business, the opportunity to help others." He looked toward the fields. "What else do I really need?" The answer stayed with Sarah. Because in a world where many people constantly wanted more, Jacob seemed content. Not because he lacked ambition, but because he understood the difference between success and excess. The man who had humiliated Jacob thought his career was finished, until he received an unexpected phone call. Martin had spent weeks regretting his behavior. Every day he replayed the events in his mind. If only he had acted differently. If only he had shown basic respect. The embarrassment was overwhelming. Then one morning his phone rang. The caller was Jacob. Martin nearly dropped the device. His heart raced. Why would Jacob call him? The conversation was brief. Jacob invited him to visit the farm. Martin expected criticism. Instead, he received something else.